what we've seen is groups of demonstrators and rioters across Ukraine trying to either occupy or demonstrate outside of government buildings. Now, in the cities of Lvov and Rovno, we have seen the main local administration buildings being occupied by demonstrators. Now, I was looking online and on Twitter of accounts of thousands of people in Lvov. Also, we've seen it on the local news here as well, of scenes from there. And it's not just those two cities. In the west of Ukraine, we're also hearing of government officers being besieged, or at least the scenes of demonstrations. So certainly the unrest in Ukraine not limited to the capital here in Kiev. Now, we are hearing from the government side that they are ready to consider repealing, or at least toning down new measures, new laws that were brought in to tackle the violence here in Kiev. And we've also heard from the Prime Minister, Mr. Azarov, who said that he was ready to resign, and his whole cabinet resign, if the parliament here in Ukraine decided that they weren't up to the job. Now, that's one of those things that's going to be up for discussion at a special session of the Ukrainian parliament that will be held next week. That was announced by President Viktor Yanukovych. Also up for discussion at that session of parliament will be the possibility of holding elections. We've also been seeing a reaction to what's going on here in Kiev from further afield, from abroad. Now, the European Union has been particularly vocal on Thursday. We heard from Mr. Barroso, the president of the European Union. He held a phone call with Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, in which he said he was deeply concerned. Now, during that conversation, Mr. Yanukovych assured him that there would be no state of emergency called in Ukraine, and there was no plans at the moment to involve the military as extra type of security services on the streets. Now, he wasn't the only European leader to talk about Ukraine. The head of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, said that in his opinion, there has to be elections in Ukraine immediately, and he was calling for the Ukrainian government to call those elections. So the European Union applying pressure and making their voices heard over the subject of what continues to be, at the moment, a standoff between rioters and riot police, and a lot of talks going on between the various sides here in Ukraine.
That was RT's Peter Oliver. And here to talk a little bit more about the U.S. reaction to what's happening in the Ukraine, I'm joined by RT's Lucy Kafanov. Lucy, thanks for being with me.
No problem.
So, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney addressed the rioting in Kiev at the White House press conference this morning. So, talk to me a little bit about what the U.S. response has been so far since all of this has really gone down.
Well, there hasn't really been much of a change in the U.S. response throughout the course of this crisis, basically, with Washington again today threatening sanctions against the Ukraine if the violence there escalates. The spokesman Jay Carney did praise the Ukrainian president's decision to meet again with the protesters, but he did basically pin the blame on the current crisis on the government, saying that Yanukovych, the president there, has basically failed to address what he called the legitimate concerns of the protesters. Now, on the sanctions, no firm decision just yet. It does seem that Washington is sort of hoping to basically wait it out, not really resort to taking that step, really hoping that Yanukovych will make some moves perhaps to calm the crisis down. But it's not all empty threats. We did see earlier this week the U.S. revoking the visas of several top Ukrainian officials who were implicated in ordering police violence, not in the latest crackdown, but what happened in December and November.
Interesting. And Vice President Biden actually called the Ukrainian president today. What was that conversation about?
His phone was ringing off the hook. I think a bunch of European leaders also called him. Biden basically urged on Yanukovych to keep on meeting with the opposition. He said all the typical platitudes about de-escalating the crisis, trying to find a peaceful resolution to what's going on there. He emphasized that he believes also that the Ukrainian government it's only the government of Ukraine that can ensure a peaceful resolution to this. So basically saying the ball is in the government's court, not really the protesters. We do have to keep in mind that, of course, while the protests were sparked by the decision by Ukraine not to sign the EU pact, it's really evolved and shifted into anger over government corruption, police violence, as well as harsh new anti-demonstration, anti-protest laws. And Biden did seem to make a veiled reference to that when he urged the Ukrainian president to respect freedoms of assembly. assembly and expression.
And back when the rioting first started, I think it was in November, you know, the Obama administration was saying very, very little about it. I know Secretary Kerry decided not to take a trip there, but can you talk about, you know, why the U.S. has really sort of been cautious in taking a stand?
It really has been cautious, and it seems to be that the muted response has less to do with Ukraine and more about what else is happening on the agenda right now internationally, as well as the U.S. relationship to Russia. The two countries are kind of on polar opposite sides here, with the U.S. sort of supporting more of a European-oriented Ukraine, Russia, of course, wanting to see its former Soviet republic in its orbit. But really, the White House doesn't want to be seen as provoking the Kremlin on this issue, because, of course, we have the cooperation between the U.S. and Russia on several issues. Syrian chemical weapons, the Iran talks, and, of course, the Geneva II peace conference that's still going on in Geneva at the moment.
So the U.S. not wanting to ruffle any feathers.
Basically.
So what's the latest on this truce? How long is it supposed to last? Is there a definitive time, or? You
know, my experience with these things is you never know. Unfortunately, there are so many elements on the ground. There could be provocations on either side. And while, of course, everyone, I'm sure, is rather grateful when they see these kind of truce agreements called for, anything could really happen. It's such a tense situation. Feelings are so high on both ends that any sort of mistake on either side could really spark the conflict yet again.
Indeed. Well, Lucy Kavanaugh, thanks for your great reporting.
Thank you.